Hey everyone, I'm here with Pastor Daniel. There has been a lot going on in our country, in our world lately, and so we wanted just to step into a conversation specifically about racial injustice and everything that's been going on. And so, we want to just have a first conversation between Daniel and I. Really, we want to do this because we know that we are called to love our God and to love our neighbors. And so we wanted to step into a dialogue about that. Now, we have already started some of this in terms of integrating prayers into our hunger nights, really focused on racial injustice, some prayers for Sunday mornings. We've worked this into our sermons. But we wanted to step into a more intentional conversation and really start with a posture of listening and learning, and a posture of applying scripture to our lives, to this very practical piece of our lives, so that we can model the heart of God and follow Jesus into these conversations. So to step into that conversation a little bit more, I want to jump into a dialogue between the two of us here right now.
Yeah, Scott and I have been chatting, obviously throughout our friendship. We've shared things, but especially in the last 2 months here. And I'm just really thankful for my brother who's been really patient to get to this point. We've wanted to have this kind of dialogue. And I just needed to prepare myself, but Scott hasn't pushed and forced. He said, when I'm ready to talk, we'll talk. And so here we are. It's been a journey to get to this point in the last 2 months. Just preparing myself to be able to share some things that are challenging and hard, and not things that I've shared with a lot of people, because it's not the most fun stuff to talk about. And even within that, I've been having to process hard conversations that I've had with people that are really close to me, that are struggling to see the realness or understand things within here, and just been hard to navigate. But I believe God wants to speak some within this. So really, here we are.
Yeah. So with that, Daniel, would you share a little bit about what it was like to grow up as a person of color, just to open up the eyes for some of us who didn't have that experience?
Yeah, so I feel like I have a unique, or at least just to be able to relate here. I grew up here in Orange County in Irvine, and so my experience is from here, and there may not be a lot that people have heard in that regard. But I've grown up as a mixed kid. My dad's black, my mom's white, and that has had its own issues, challenges, things to walk through when it comes to racial, just figuring out who I am and what that means. And yet in the midst of that, something that my dad really had to prepare me for was that even though I'm mixed, even though I've got a white mom and dad's black, how authority, how the world, how the police are going to see me, was that my dad was like, they're going to see you as black. And so I have to be ready to embrace that part of me and being seen in that sense. And so from a very early age, probably between 5 and 10, my dad had to have conversations with me about being prepared for dealing with people and dealing with authorities. And if officers ever stopped to talk with me, just anywhere in the city or at the age where I could drive, that I had to be prepared to have my life saved, to not set myself up to lose my life. My dad taught me to not have a victim mentality, but that there was a realness to things that I needed to be prepared for. Don't give a reason for me to have anything happen. And so dad had to prepare me, if officers are speaking to me, I do whatever they say. There's no arguing. If I'm driving, I got to keep my hands on the wheel, and I got to ask them for permission, even though they've already said that they want my license and registration. I need to ask for permission to reach for those things, because we've seen people of color lose their life in those situations. I have to dialogue with the officer, actually walk them through the process of, can I go into my glove compartment or here to grab these things, and then talk through that. And ultimately my dad was just like, you need to do all of that, because the most important thing is your life. We will figure everything else out later. If for whatever reason they arrest you, whether they had cause or not, like we will try to figure out everything else afterwards, but you make sure that you're alive. And so I think that just paints a bit of a picture of the kind of worldview that I then had to carry moving from there.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Certainly that has been one of the areas where it's been very eye-opening for me. I've heard so many of those similar stories the last couple months, especially, where you just realize how prevalent that is as a person of color, and it's something that I never had to experience. And so I certainly had the fears of what would happen, how would I pay for a ticket, how would I have to deal with the insurance increase, or what would my parents think when I was younger. But never did I have to think about, oh, if a police officer pulls behind me, that I might need to worry about violence or something happening to me in that sense. So thank you for sharing that. That's certainly been something that's really impacted me and opened my eyes over the last few months, especially. Even from there, though, would you go in a little bit more just to share even just a few specific experiences that you might have had to see how this actually has played out in reality for you?
Yeah, and I think as I share some of these things, I also want to say that I'm not here to speak for all of the Black community. I won't, and I can't, but I'll share from personal experience. Although I'm really encouraged in conversations that I've had with the Black side of my family and even other friends. I've had my own struggle to get to the point to share some of these things by being a mixed kid. And that community has really embraced me in this process of like, no, you're with us, and the things that have happened, you're part of us. And so I think a few things that come to mind for me is that, yeah, I remember a few times that I was called the N-word and how hurtful that was. And the first one that comes to mind was about 12 years old, walking through a park in our neighborhood with a couple of my friends, and some white kid just came up and just started calling me that, just started calling me the N-word, no reason. And I'll never forget one of my white friends that was with me, just right in the moment, it was without hesitation, he turned around and he just grabbed the kid, he punched him 3 times in the stomach, and the conversation and everything was done. And I called this friend earlier before we had this conversation, because we never talked about it after that point. Just don't think it was fun to talk about. But I called him to thank him in that moment. And certainly my friend was like, I don't think violence is what I would have chose. It's the only time I think in my life I've ever instigated a fight, but there was just something inside of him in that moment that was like, this isn't right. And I told him that meant so much to me. And I'm not condoning the violence either, but just that someone would stand up in that moment and acknowledge. And then another one that comes to mind for me that it's not as shocking to me, but it might be shocking to others, because, you know, we saw Jackie Robinson break the color barrier in 1947 for baseball. And if anyone's seen the movie 42, you've maybe seen a scene where there's this father and son in the stands, and they're just yelling the N-word at him like the whole game. And you know, not that we haven't made progress in civil rights movement and things that have happened, but it's 45 plus years later, and I'm about 12 years old, 13 myself, playing right field in Little League. And I've got, you know, 3 or 4 boys that are watching the game that moved over to be just far enough away from me to hear them along the line. And for inning after inning, they were just calling me the N-word. And I was just trying to fight that mentality that my dad had given to me of like, I'm not a victim, and I'm here to play this game, and I can't respond back, and I'm going to do this. But I remember walking into the dugout maybe after the 2nd inning or 3rd inning that this had happened. I just broke down in tears, and my coach came up to me like, what is up? And I had to share with him. And then he walked over to the umpire and had these kids kicked out. But just having to deal with that was heartbreaking. And then I remember a time where my friends were in a car with me, and we were driving back from watching a basketball game, and I'm hyper aware as driving from my dad and how he raised me. And the officer pulls up behind me. I hit a stop sign, completely stop, maybe even too long, who knows, but I'm very aware of it. And I go through, and I get pulled over, and just have this very different experience. And my friends in the car as well are like, something feels different about this. And he asked me to get out of the car. I had to go back to the squad car. Never made me check anything for drugs or drunkenness or anything, but just the attitude and the way that I felt like I was being treated, something didn't feel right within this. And having to be removed from my friends so they couldn't hear the conversation or be a part of it. I'm like, why am I having to walk back to the vehicle? And I just remember getting back in the car and having my friends just be like, this isn't right. And I just remember breaking down in tears then, and then breaking down in tears that night in my house, just thinking why why does it have to be like this? Why do I have to encounter these things? And I think along with that too, just even in church experiences, I speak a little bit different than maybe some people that generally in the Orange County area, and have just encountered some of that even in the church, of how I think people have viewed me. And so, yeah, Scott, I think those are a couple things that come to mind to share. There's more, but I think that's enough to open up the window.
Yeah. Thank you for being willing to go into that. I think what's just most shocking, even in these few examples that you go into quickly, is just how dehumanizing some of this behavior can be, and what it does when we treat people like that, really for things that are so far beyond their control. And it seems like it negates the dignity that God gave us, the image of God inside of us. It almost denies that. It's so hard to hear these stories, and these are just, a few, and we know of so many others as well that are similar and yet different. It's so hard to hear. And I'm sure it's hard to even recount. So thank you for being willing to go into those.
Absolutely. I think before we even go further, just something that I want to clarify for our people watching as well, whether you know me or not too, is I do want you to hear from me that even with the experiences that I've had that have been very real, I don't view every police officer as being corrupt or bad. I happen to actually have some friends or even relationships with people in church communities I've worked in, where they're officers, and I hold them in high regard. But just to bring a realness that these encounters have happened. I think along with that too, something that's really important to share is this too, that if you're not a person of color and you hear these things and some of these stories we share, that doesn't mean that you have not had hardship, that you haven't had to endure things that have been extremely challenging, that you haven't, that there's even things in your life, and I have friends too that have had to endure some things that I haven't. But what we're saying here is that there's another layer to that. Your skin color hasn't been something that has had to make it harder for you possibly, and then there's some other layers within this. But I want to make sure that you don't hear me saying that your experiences are invalid, because they are. So I think those things are important for me to share as I share parts of my story here and help us engage in this conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that as well. And just for the authentic and honest approach that you bring, while also having a pastoral heart, even for others, even as you experience discrimination. I just appreciate that you're always thinking of others as well. So thank you for sharing all that.
Absolutely. Scott, I think for you, as we've been having these dialogues and conversations too, we've been talking about, for both of us, and how each of us are processing these things. I think maybe to bring the narrative community and any guests that are watching into it as well too. We're blessed to have this relationship that we have, and have this multicultural relationship and pastoring that we get. But for you in this, obviously I've heard some of these, but to tell our people, this sense of this idea, this phrasing of Black Lives Matter, just for you, how have you navigated felt within this?
Yeah. Well, if I'm honest, the very first time that I heard that phrase, it made me a little bit uncomfortable. It felt a little bit threatening. It almost felt like it might be at my expense. And so I'll be honest, I was taken a little bit aback by it the very first time I heard it. But then I started to reflect on it a little bit more and process it, especially theologically, and started walking through that journey. And I won't go into the whole thing right here, right now. But key things that came to mind along the way were just processing God's love for all people, the incredible love that he had, that he was willing to sacrifice, where Jesus was willing to sacrifice his position in heaven and come down and empty himself so that he might die for all people. Even as I mentioned a moment ago, just the image of God being in all people, and just understanding how incredibly special God has made people of all colors, and the great love that he has for people of all colors. and not just what he did in the past, but even thinking too about what the future looks like. And so we get some great pictures of this, thinking of like Revelations chapter 5, where it talks about how all people or all tribes, tongues, and nations will come together in heaven in eternity and be worshiping God and will be united as his people. And so I think the more that I understood that this wasn't just about me, certainly. This wasn't even just about one people. This was about God's heart for all of his people. And just and then the more I've learned as well, just about how my neighbors, who I'm called to love, specifically people of color, feel marginalized, how they are marginalized, how they have so many challenging experiences that they face. And that has just moved me in so many ways. And certainly a lot of that in my experience has been with my Latino neighbors, but also hearing your stories and stories of really of so many people of color has just really helped me to empathize with my neighbor and understand some of their plight and the ways that they are marginalized in society. And I feel like God has helped me to see beyond myself in this somewhat, and to really just love my neighbors in this. Again, I realize that phrase Black Lives Matter can make some of us feel threatened, and it can make me ask the question of, well, does my life matter? Like, what about me? And there's a couple things that I've been learning recently, that a couple metaphors that I've heard recently that really have helped me process that a little bit. The first one is this idea that if my house is on fire, which has literally happened to me, that if the fire department comes and races to my house because it's on fire, what if one of my neighbors down the street is saying, well, wait, why aren't you protecting my house? Why aren't you putting water on my house? Don't you care about my house? And certainly the fire department's response is, well, we're here to protect all of you, but this house is the house that's on fire right now, and we're going to try and put that fire out. And I think that's been helpful for me to understand why we would focus on Black Lives Matter right now, because this is a community of people who certainly their house is on fire, and there's a lot going on there, and we really need to focus on that. Similarly, I've kind of processed this in the sense of, what if my wife were to come to me and say to me, tell me that you love me. Do you love me? And if I was to respond to Lauren and say, I love all women, I don't think that would go over super well. And the point being that of course I'm called to love all of God's people, all women, all men, all children. But in that moment, my wife is looking for me to affirm my love for her. And I feel like that's what's happening right now. And as I've been able to step back and reflect is that this is a time not to deny other people love, but to show a community of people an extra layer of love. Similarly, there's a passage in Luke where the parable of the lost sheep. And you have this shepherd who really represents Jesus in this parable. And he has 100 sheep, and one of them wanders off and gets lost and is in danger. And so he leaves the 99 to go and rescue the one that is in trouble. And he finds that sheep and he throws him over his shoulders. And it talks about how there is celebration in heaven when this one that is lost has been found and recovered. And it has nothing to do with a lack of love for the 99, but the incredible love that our Savior has for all people. And especially for those that are lost, for those that are hurting, for those that are struggling. And so it's opened my eyes just a little bit more to how I myself can follow him in that same light. And not to say that I won't love the others, but those that are really struggling, those are the ones that I'm going to show particular love to in this season, and make sure that they know that they are loved and valued. Now, one thing that I know that some people struggle with is there is this organization of Black Lives Matter, and some people agree or disagree with certain principles there. For me, that's neither here nor there. That Black Lives Matter is not about an organization, but it's a declaration of love. This is a declaration of value that people have. And I know one of our good friends that we have, I saw that he's tried to move to the statement of value Black lives, I believe is kind of the direction that he's moved, because he wants to have this declaration of love for all people. And so I think without belaboring the point, I just wrap it up by saying that, you know, it's only when Black lives matter that all lives can really matter.
That's good. I think that, you know, to speak a little bit into that, again, I don't speak for the whole Black community, but those that I do talk with, that is the heart of that statement. Is it's about saying, it's really about saying that all lives are valuable, but until we can actually show that in this highlighted moment of on the Black community, then all lives really aren't mattering. And so how can we bring awareness to that and shift that actually points towards not just Black people, but everyone, then to show that same value. And so I think that's a great way to try to help explain what that is. And again, here too, I hope as we kind of close this out, I don't share these things looking for people to come say sorry to me and apologize. Is not what we're looking for in the heart of this. My hope is that as God has been pushing me to be able to share some more of my story or my thoughts or just engaging within this, is really that instead of apologizing and sorries that people don't even necessarily need to give if they haven't partaken in certain things or whatnot, you know, wasn't a part of slavery back in the day and not needing to necessarily apologize for that now. But my hope is that people are willing to listen and to learn and to engage. And I think that actually is what has the potential to help bring forth change within this. And so I share that, and I hope is that I leap out. I hope that I can be a voice that, as someone who's grown up here in Orange County as a person of color, that maybe the relationships God has given to me, maybe some of the favor that he has given to me, maybe there are some people that are willing to listen to me and they haven't been willing to listen to others, but maybe this makes it more real or brings something forth. And so that's one of my hopes of a first step out of this.
Yeah. I'm reminded that our third rhythm is engage people, which we say is to love your neighbor and share your story. And we've said over the years that we can't love our neighbor if we don't know our neighbor. We certainly can't love our neighbor if we don't understand what their pains are, what their name is, what they're going through, how they struggle, what's going on in their lives. And so even as we approach this conversation, we really want to say, like, this is just the beginning, but that we want to start with listening and learning. We want to kind of continue in that posture so we can really know who our neighbor is and what they're going through, so that we can best love them as Jesus would love them. We are committed to continuing this conversation, to helping move it along and continue dialoguing and really kind of move into a kingdom mindset. This is not about politics. This is not about positions. This is not even about policies or anything else. We're really asking ourselves the question of what would Jesus do in this situation? What is a kingdom mindset? How do we, in light of what's going on in our world, how do we follow Jesus into this? And so a famous theologian, Karl Barth, said that he wants to preach with the newspaper in one hand and the Bible in the other, effectively taking scriptural principles and addressing the realities of our lives. And that's really what we want to do here, is that we want to have the Bible as our foundation and work that into these things that are going on in our lives. So this is the beginning of our conversation, our journey in this. Daniel, thank you for being so willing to share with us.
Absolutely. I think I would help close out too, saying to the narrative community that Scott and I are with you in this too. Scott and I are also a part of having to look at ourselves in the mirror too, humility, and just say where we played a part in some of these things and injustice. And so we as well stand with you in that. We look at ourselves in the mirror as we take this journey and take more steps in this direction with the narrative community. So thank you, Scott, as well, for sharing today.